Now, ladies and gentlemen, now that we have covered everything that has to do with the After Effects UI and we understand how it works and how the timeline works, it's finally time to cover the functions. Now, as I mentioned in the previous course, the functions are basically everything that you can add into After Effects and start playing around with. There are a few main ways you can create things in After Effects. There's really mainly two. One of them is you add things and then you add effects to them. That's kind of how you stylize and create things in After Effects. And the second one is you make animations and 3D animations, which we'll talk about later. Now we've got an entire course set, like we have got a whole set of courses just dedicated to covering all the effects that we're going to be using, because there's so many useful ones which you guys are going to love. So that being said, don't worry too much about the effects now. We will also have an entire set of courses covered, basically going to cover everything that has to do with animating and how you're going to be using that. So also don't worry about that now. What you are going to worry about is what are the things we can start adding, like the basic functions we can start adding into After Effects, things like texts, solids, shape layers, and like how do we even use those? That's what we're going to be covering in the next few courses. And we're going to be starting with text. Now text is really simple in After Effects. I'm over here inside of After Effects, and the main thing you need to know about text is it's really simple in After Effects. The way you make it more complex is you just layer on more effects on it. But as I mentioned, we're going to cover effects later on. So how do you add text inside of After Effects? Well, it's really simple. The way you add anything inside of After Effects is you just right click and you click on new. Now when you click on new, you are able to add in new things into your timeline. You can either add in new text, new solid, new lights, camera, null object, shape layer, adjustment layer, so on and so forth. The main ones you guys are going to be using all the time are text, solid, light, camera, and null object and shape layer and adjustment layer. These are the main ones. On top of that, camera and lighting, these have to do with 3D, so you don't need to worry too much about that right now. Null objects also has to do mainly with 3D, so you don't need to worry too much about that right now. Instead, the main things you're going to be learning is texts, solids, shape layers, and adjustment layers. What are all of them responsible for? Let's get started on text. When you click on new in text, you're going to see a new layer pops into After Effects. Now inside of After Effects, when you have a new layer like this, like the text, you're able to basically change whichever is inside of the layer, and that layer has one single property, and that is the text. So this is what a text layer looks like. It has the word T over here on the left side. To type something inside, you guys can see there's a red kind of line over here. And to type something, you could just click on your type tool and click and type, or you could just double click on the text layer and type out whatever you want. So I'm just going to type out text layer here. Now you might be wondering, how do I change things about this text layer? There are two main ways that you can change and affect this text layer. One of the first ones is the properties panel. So when you select this, if you don't have the properties panel pop up, you could select window and click on properties, but this is the properties panel that is the exact same inside of Premiere Pro. You can use this to change the font. As you guys can see, you can change the font over here. You can use it to change the font type, so you can make it heavy, you can make it light. You can use it to change the text size. You could change the text height with it. So the text height is if we've got two sentences like this, text layer, and we could change the text height in between both of them. Also, by the way, it's the same as Premiere Pro. You have to double click before you do anything. You can change the text height in between them. We can change the variation of the text. We can change the variation of the fonts. We can actually like make them further away or closer up. We can change the fill color over here by clicking on fill and changing the fill color. We can add a stroke and change the stroke color. And for the stroke, we could change the width of the stroke. We could change like what kind of corners we've got. Do we want rounded corners, sharp corners? Do you want it to fill over the stroke? What do you want? We can also change like a bunch of other things. We can make it all caps. We can make it all lowercase. We can make it a subscript. You could do so much, okay? And then if you go down, you can actually like alter where it is and a bunch of things that have to do with your positioning. Now, this being said, you might wonder why I went through this so quickly. The reason I did is because you probably noticed this is very familiar, and that's because it's the exact same as Premiere Pro. Like, there's no need for me to go through this because you guys already know all this stuff. You guys already know how to, change the font of your text, change the font style, font size, so on and so forth. The way After Effects is going to be more useful for your text is by allowing you guys to change the properties of the text, not from the properties panel, but the actual properties of the layer. And we're going to talk about this in just a moment, but there's so much to text inside of After Effects. There are two main things you just have to understand about text, okay? Besides the properties, which are just the basics which we always use, there are two main things inside of After Effects that we use a lot. Number one is the actual properties of the layer, which we are going to be talking about right now. And number two is the effects. That's how you make text look really good inside of After Effects. Now, you don't really need to dive into too much of this, because we're going to be understanding this slowly as we understand effects, as we understand animations. You guys are going to realize, oh, okay, you could do this to text, you could do that to text. So don't worry too much about this now, but I will quickly break them down for you. So effects mainly change the way that your text looks like. If you want your text to look a certain way, like if you want a certain text style, if you guys remember back in the Premiere Pro Masterclass, we talked that there are two main things for text. There's your text style and your text animation. Your text animation is the animation which you apply on your text, and the text style is the appearance of your text. If you guys want to alter the appearance of your text and this properties panel isn't enough, then that's when you use effects. And we're going to be adding color effects, distortion effects, warping effects, all kinds of effects to change our text. Okay, now on top of this, if you want to change your text style, animation, that's where we dive into the properties of the layer. So if you're on your layer, I want you to go to the left side and click on the arrow tool, and you're going to see text and transform. So the transform function, under it, we've got all of the transform functions that have to do with this layer. You've got your position, scale, rotation, so on and so forth. Everything that affects this layer from a transform perspective. But if we open up the text, now we've got a bunch of other things. So the first, I'm just going to go ahead and break them down. And I know it's a lot of information. So at the end of the lesson, I'm going to recap it for you. And I'm going to tell you guys what you should keep in mind and what you should worry about later. Okay. So the first thing you're going to see is on the right side, you've got this animate with a plus icon. We'll talk about this in just a bit. Okay. The first thing you see is your source text. Your source text basically is what your text is. So right now I've got text layer written out inside of my text. If I keyframe my source text right now and as text layer and move forward and change it to something else, it's going to change later on. Okay, and this will make sense in just a bit. So if I type out something like here, I'll show you guys an example. If we type out text layer like this, okay, and I won't make this thing full caps like that, I'll just leave it as it is, you know, normal. That just looks weird. Okay, awesome. So if I keyframe the current source text and then I move forward and I type out text style, whoops, text style, and if we go ahead and play through this, you guys are going to see this thing goes from text to text style like this. Your source text just affects your text or what's inside of it, and you're never going to be using this, so don't even worry about it. Under it, you've got something called path options. Now, path options control the path which your text is following. You're also not going to be using this. Under that, you've got more options. More options is going to control a bunch of things that you're also not going to be using. Ultimately, all of these settings over here, you're probably never going to be using. Ideally, you're probably just going to be changing the look of your text over here and then adding a bunch of effects on them that we'll learn how to make really cool and master effects later on. But ideally, you're going to be adding a bunch of effects on there to make it look really good, but you're not going to be using any of these settings down here. What you will be using is this animate button over here. When you click on this plus icon, you see a bunch of things come up. Now, the animate button or the plus icon down here basically adds more properties to your text. Okay, and let me explain this. I'm going to quickly make my text bold so you guys can see it by changing my font type to the bold one. So the plus icon here adds in a bunch of properties for your text that you can then change. So let's say you made a basic animation. You can actually, inside of After Effects, layer on an animation on top of that one. And it gets very confusing. Now, most of the time, you're not going to be using this with text, but you're going to be using this a lot when it comes to shape layers and solids. Okay? But for now, let's quickly just have a quick run through all of them. And then as we become more advanced through the program, we'll go back and understand all of them even more. So don't worry too much about this, but you can basically add in an anchor point to your text. You can add in a position to your text, and you can add in scale, skew, rotation, opacity, all of these, okay? You can add in all of these different transform properties. Now you might ask me, but Joseph, don't we have a transform property down here? You have a transform property for your entire layer, but this adds the transform property to the actual text, like the individual text inside. So it gives you more control over the characters which are inside of your text. Like for example, if I added in the position, you guys can see we have something called a range selector and we have animator 1. So this is called the animate function. And when I add whatever is inside of it, it's going to be called animator. Now, under our animator, we can add more things. Okay, this is where it starts to get confusing. Again, You're not going to be using this stuff, so this is just to explain for you guys. So just browse through it with me, and then I'll tell you guys what should stick in your mind after this lesson. So once you add any of these functions over here, it gets added in as a animator function. Now the animator function has a function inside of it, which is the add function. And you can either add a property or a selector function. And what these basically are, a property is something that affects your text, and a selector is something that the property which you applied is going to follow too. So there's something called a range selector here. And if I move my position of my text to the bottom like this, and I open up my range selector now controls my position, okay? Again, it's confusing. You're not going to be using it, but I'm just explaining it for you guys. We'll go through it one more time. So I'm going to go through from the beginning just one more time, okay? Let's say you click on your animate property. Your animate allows you to add in more properties into your text. It allows you to add in things like your position, your scale, hue, so on and so forth. Let's say I did add in a position property. The way that the position property works is if I change the position of my text, it's going to be applied to my text, not my layer. But this also comes with something we call a selector. And what the selector basically does is it kind of walks through your text. So what this means is if I move, my selector right now is at 100%. So 100% of my text is being moved down, up and down. If I move my end back, you guys will notice my text starts to come back up. Now, if I set my selector to 50%, like this, only half of my text is going to be down and the other half is going to be up. Why is this? That's because my range selector has only allowed 50% of the text to follow this second property, which is the position. Okay, and for that reason, as I move my end and my start, you guys can see this alternates what our text looks like. And you can basically play around with this. Now, what does this allow you to do? It allows you to do some really fancy text animations, which we're not going to worry about right now. We're going to worry about those later, but I do want to explain these for you guys to help you understand. Now, let's say you didn't add in the position. Let's say you added in the opacity, for example. Now, this also comes with a range selector. Now, if I set my opacity to 100%, this basically means that my range selector, if it is at 100%, 100% of my text is at 100% opacity. Now let's say I set my opacity to 0% and I moved my end back. Then all of a sudden, 50% of my text is now at 0% opacity and the other 50% doesn't follow the rule. So your range selector allows you to limit where the property gets applied. I'm hoping this is kind of starting to make sense in your mind. Okay, once again, you're not going to be using this stuff. This stuff is just for understanding. We're going to be recapping it at the end. Now, let's say I don't add in my opacity. Let's say I add in my scale, for example. Now, if I change my scale to something big and I mess around with my range selector, guess what's going to happen? It's also going to allow certain things to happen. So my range selector ideally just kind of controls where this property is being applied. So if I added in the position property or the opacity property, this can only be applied based on what the range selector allows it to do. And that's where you can come up with some cool animations, but we'll dive into animations in the next lessons. But for now, that's what you kind of have to understand. Another thing you can also add is the appearance. So you can actually add in like a fill color. You can add in a bunch of things that have to do with the fill of the text. You can add in a bunch of things that have to do with the stroke. You can add in a bunch of things that have to do with the tracking. You can add in character offset. So if I added in like character offset, you guys can see there's a range selector with it. If I offset the characters, right, and I move my range selector back, then it's going to write them out like this. There's a whole bunch of effects you can make. And there's no point diving into all of them because you're probably not going to be using any of them. Instead, we're going to dive into them slowly as we go throughout the courses. This way you grasp a bigger understanding of all of it. But that is your animate function. Now, as I mentioned before, okay, creating text inside of After Effects has like a few main ways that you could do it. When you add in your text layer, one of the ways you can alter your text is by changing the basic properties. The second way you can alter your text is by adding effects on top of it. And the third way is by adding your animate function and animating different things. Now, for the sake of the tutorial, we're just going to be creating basic text. We're not going to be creating any complex animations. We'll talk about animations later on, but we are going to be talking about how we can stylize our text. So for this, let's say this was a subtitle. What's the first thing I'm saying over here? I have spoken with lots and lots of business owners. I say I have spoken with lots and lots of business owners. So let's type this out. I'm going to type out I have spoken with lots and lots of business owners. Now, one thing you notice is it doesn't fit in the screen. So I'm just going to create a paragraph right here by clicking on the center of my text, holding down Shift and clicking Enter. this creates a paragraph. Okay, now if I don't like the distance in between them, I can always change this inside of our properties panel. So I'm going to go with this. This is pretty good. I think they are too far apart, so we can make them slightly closer. Okay, now one more thing I can actually do is I can select all of it like this, or I can just double click on my text, and I'm going to make it all light. Instead, I'm going to select just business owners, and I'm going to make that bold. This is something you can do inside of After Effects. You can actually create a text and only change certain properties inside of it. Okay, now let's say I don't like its current position and I want to move it down to the bottom. There's a few ways I could go about it. I could literally just grab my cursor and drag it down, or we could do this the professional way, as we learned earlier on. If you click on P inside of your layer, it brings up the position property, and we can move our position down to the bottom like this. Now let's say this text is looking pretty good, everything is solid, then there we go. That's it for text. Now one thing you notice is I accidentally actually cut this because I clicked the wrong button. I'll talk to you guys about shortcuts later on, but this is good enough. Okay, so when it comes to text inside of After Effects, you guys now know how to create text. You guys now know the properties that go under text. Once again, okay, you don't need to use them. I just want to cover them to put that thought in your mind so we can go over them later. But right now, just don't worry about it. The main thing you need to worry about text is there are three main ways to stylize it inside of After Effects. You've got the properties panel, which is the basic way. You've got your effects that you add on, and we've got a whole masterclass covering all the effects we're going to be using, so don't worry about that. And you also have your animator function, where you can add in complex effects on your text, which we're also going to be covering. So don't worry too much about this. We've got a lot to cover, but the fundamentals of text is this is how you add text, and this is how you use it inside of After Effects. With this being said, guys, I'll see you in the next episode where we're going to be diving into our second function, and we're going to be exploring more of what's inside of After Effects. But for text, this is everything. Let's go ahead and dive into our second function.